Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. This is the penultimate episode of the history section of my library. This penultimate shelf is my favorite of my entire history collection. It has my Ancient Egypt and Ancient Near Eastern books, which are my favorite period of history to read about. So let's get started, starting with Ancient Egypt. First up is The Complete Tutankhamun by Nicholas Reeves. I received this book from Steve Donahue back in 2022. At the time, there was a glut of Ancient Egypt books to celebrate the centennial of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, and I reviewed a number of these books for Open Letters review. And so this one was pretty good. He has a very weird idea about Tutankhamun's tomb, though. I also rather enjoyed The Story of Tutankhamun, An Intimate Life of the Boy Who Became King by Gary J. Shaw. This is a really good biography of Tutankhamun. I also read Ramesses the Great, Egypt's King of Kings by Toby Wilkinson. This is also a really good biography of Ramesses. I'm a bit more critical of Pharaohs of the Sun, The Rise and Fall of Tutankhamun's Dynasty by Guy de la Baudouillère. This is a history of the 18th dynasty, which was responsible for reunifying Egypt during the in the aftermath of the Second Intermediate Period, founding the New Kingdom. And so this dynasty reigned until Tutankhamun, who properly is the last pharaoh of this dynasty, although his two successors are counted in the 18th rather than as intermediate to the 19th dynasty. I'm critical of this book because de la Baudouillère has a particular take on the 18th dynasty, comparing them to Ceausescu in Romania, the communist dictator of Romania. And I think he also has a comparison to the Kim dynasty in North Korea. And that kind of bugged me. I wish there was another history of the 18th dynasty. I'm also not terribly fond of Egypt's Golden Couple, When Akhenaten and Nefertiti Were Gods on Earth by John and Colleen Darnell. So this is partially a dual biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. It's also somewhat of a fictionalization, and also an expedition memoir, and it doesn't work. Tutankhamun's Trumpet, Ancient Egypt and 100 Objects from the Boy King's Tomb by Toby Wilkinson. So this is a history of ancient Egypt through 100 objects that are grouped together in groups of, I think, 10. And it's an interesting way to approach history, but I don't think it really worked. Wilkinson also has a more traditional history of ancient Egypt, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. The Story of Egypt, the Civilization That Shaped the World by Joanne Fletcher. So this is another more traditional history of ancient Egypt. So moving on from ancient Egypt, I have some ancient Near Eastern books, starting with A History of the Ancient Near East, circa 3000 to 323 BC by Mark van der Meerup. So this is a more academic history of the ancient Near East. Amanda H. Padani does a much better job at making the history interesting and alive, starting with Brotherhood of Kings, How International Relations Shaped the Ancient Near East. So this is a study of the relationships between the various monarchs who ruled the various city-states and more territorial states and kingdoms in the ancient Near East. And it is pretty good. Weaver, Scribes, and Kings, A New History of the Ancient Near East, also by Amanda H. Padani, is an amazing work of scholarship on the ancient Near East. She focuses not just on kings, but also on everyday people and brings their stories to life. This is really history as it should be written. Last year, Between Two Rivers, Ancient Mesopotamia and the Birth of History by Moody al-Rashid came out. So this is very similar to Tutankhamun's Trumpet in that this is a history of the ancient Near East using objects found at the temple of the end temple of Ishtar in Uruk. That formed a sort of, well, the person who discovered it viewed it as sort of an early proto-museum. Really, it should be looked at more as a curio cabinet. The Kingdom of the Hittites by Trevor Bryce. Probably the seminal work on the Hittites for the time being. Hopefully there is a new work on the Hittites, but for now this is foundational. And he did a trilogy of work on the Hittites. The second one being Life and Society in the Hittite World. Trevor Bryce also wrote Ancient Syria, A 3,000-Year History, which is pretty good. Assyria, The Rise and Fall of the World's First Empire by Eckhart Fromm is also really good. It's a study of one of the major kingdoms of the ancient Near East that survived the Bronze Age collapse. Persians, The Age of the Great Kings by Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones is a good history of the First Persian Empire. Although, after a certain point, the sources rely more on the ancient Greeks rather than archaeology of Persia and what is now Iran, which kind of bugged me. So the next batch of books are Alexander. Soldier, Priest, and God, A Life of Alexander the Great by F.S. Neiden. This is a pretty good biography of Alexander the Great that looks at him through the lens of his megalomania. I think I like Alexander the Great, His Life and His Mysterious Death by Anthony Everett a bit better, though. I also have Alexander of Macedon, 356 to 323 BC, a historical biography by Peter Green, which is also pretty good. I am less fond Philip and Alexander, Kings and Conquerors by Adrian Goldsworthy. So this is a dual biography of father and son. Unfortunately, Goldsworthy plays things a little too conservatively for my taste. And I think that he's probably best suited just focusing on Roman history, as long as it's not Roman and Persian history. And finally, Alexander at the End of the World, The Forgotten Final Years of Alexander the Great by Rachel Kuser. So this is a history of, or biography of Alexander the Great from the fall of Persepolis to his death. And it is pretty good. So, that wraps up this penultimate shelf. I will be back with the final shelf, so look forward to that. And until I see you next time, BookTube, have a great day.